Today we are going to go over the back squat from start to finish with some beginner and some advanced tips in there to help you get as much as you can out of every session at the bar. The barbell back squat is a strength-based exercise which puts a good amount of focus on your quadriceps as well as getting some assistance from your glutes and your hamstrings. To get yourself started, you're going to grab yourself a barbell and place it into a squat rack. From here, we're going to check to see that the barbell is sat in a position that is just underneath your shoulder height. From here, grip the barbell with both hands. Now you want to make sure that your hands are the same distance from the center of the barbell and are ideally just outside shoulder width. I'd highly recommend using the markings on the barbell to give yourself a good idea where the center position actually is. Step under the bar, finding a comfortable position on the upper back. At this point, you should have slightly bent knees, and when you stand fully up, the barbell should come free from the rack. Take 1 to 2 steps back, and now you're ready to start squatting. Start by thinking about bending your knees and pushing your hips back at the same time. Once you hit the bottom, think about driving the floor away and return it to your start position. Finally, for your racking, have your head and eye gaze forward. Walk forward until the bar hits both sides of the rack and then simply bring it down. So there are a few key points that everyone from beginner to advanced squatters should know to make sure you are as effective and as efficient as you can. These points are broken up into your foot position, your squat depth, and the bar position on your shoulders. Starting off with your foot position. This is subjective to yourself, and it would be wrong of me to blanket prescribe a one-size-fits-all guide, but there are some guidelines to keep in mind. A general rule of thumb is to find a stance that allows you to get your hips slightly lower or parallel to your knees at the bottom position. Setting up your phone to record a bodyweight squat or getting someone to give you some advice is always a great idea here. I always recommend starting bodyweight here with your feet roughly outside of hip width, rotating your feet slightly outwards. From here, try squatting with your feet a little bit wider and a little bit closer together to see what feels good and what doesn't. Everybody is different here, and what feels good for you might not feel good for someone else. So you need to experiment with a few different foot stances to see what works best. So next up is your squat depth. Like I've already mentioned, the goal of your squat is generally to get your hips either parallel with the knee or slightly below. But how deep is it good for you specifically? This again massively depends on your biomechanics, which is basically just a fancy word for how you move, and your current mobility levels. If the goal is big old quads, then generally you're looking for a position that allows you to squat as deep as you can. More depth equals more stretching of the quads in the descent, meaning more potential quad recruitment in the ascent, meaning more overall gains. Do, however, be aware of something called a butt wink. Butt wink occurs at the very bottom of a squat and looks something like this. As you can see, my pelvis is sort of tucking under as I squat, and while it's not potentially a huge issue, it does create a sort of inefficient bottom position. So to help increase your squat depth, there are a few pointers that I would like to run through. First, start by setting 2 small plates on the ground at your squat stance and grab a single plate for in your hands. Step your heels onto the plates and perform your squat as normal while holding the plates straight out in front of you. The plates on the floor help to create some extra ankle mobility, whereas the plate in your hands helps cue a high upper body position. As you can see, the plates under the heels just allows that upper body to stay more upright and more comfortable in the squat. You could also play around with some box squats. Perform your squats on a stable surface, aiming for a touch and go stance as opposed to sit and stand. Once comfortable, this can then be performed with the barbell and then ideally without the box once you've mastered your depth. Finally, we have your bar position. I'd say when you're newer to back squatting, just find a bar position that feels comfortable, resting the barbell on the muscles of the upper back, not on the upper neck, which will cause some pain. We can use bar position for different leverages. Now there are 2 different positions that you will find most commonly used in the gym. A high bar position, which is where the barbell is placed high on the upper traps, or a low bar position where the barbell is placed much lower down the shoulder blades. Before I go into the differences, ideally what you would like is your bar path to stay in line with your midfoot as much as possible through the descent and the ascent of your squat. This means that the starting position of your barbell in line with your foot does matter. A high bar position creates a more upright torso position and more bending at the knees. This is generally quote unquote less optimal for strength output, but is great for quad development. A low bar creates a position in which the hips must be pushed further backwards to maintain alignment with the midfoot, which then kind of forces a lower torso angle as well. This is generally more optimal for maximal strength output and is commonly used by powerlifters around the world. The clip you watched before showing my bar path is from a super helpful app called Iron Path. I'd highly recommend using this app or a similar app like this the next time you're doing back squats to give yourself a good idea of where your bar path is hitting. If your bar path's too far forward, try sitting further backwards or having the bar lower down your shoulders. Too far back and you run the risk of physically falling over. Try starting with the bar higher on the shoulders. Eventually, you'll find that perfect alignment. Regressions are a super useful tool that are really good if you don't feel that confident to hit the barbell just yet. We're going to look at a range of exercises starting from the quote-unquote easiest all the way up to the barbell squat itself. It's quickly worth mentioning here that with all the methods we're about to cover, placing a small plate under each of your heels will aid with better positioning. As a beginner, start with the humble bodyweight squat. Use this movement to play around with things like your foot position, your chest position, and the depth of your squat. Now, once you've gotten comfortable with bodyweight, it's time to add some load. The easiest way to do this is through a goblet squat. This variation is a front-loaded squat in which your weight is held in the hands at chest level. Generally, we tend to manage our center of mass much better when the weight is front-loaded as opposed to back-loaded. This is because it's generally much easier to keep balance when your arms are in front of the body as opposed to being stuck behind, which is great for learning. Slowly build up your goblet squat and you'll be more than ready for the next step. From here, I'd recommend moving into a barbell squat with just the bar for now. You could also move into the barbell box squat to give you that peace of mind about your depth, but think about these as training wheels which you'd eventually like to get rid of. Just make sure that box is at an adequate height and you're employing the touch and go method as opposed to the sit and stand. In this final section, I'm going to cover some tips for the intermediate to advanced squatters. Now, I never claim to be an elite squatter, but I do know a thing or two about helping you hit some new PBs or just squeeze everything you can out of each rep and each set. First, and maybe the most important, is you need to make sure that you are programming your squats effectively. If you're just turning up every session with no plan, you're going for PBs every single session, you're not logging your weights, you're not tracking your volume, you're basically just setting yourself up to fail. There needs to be some sort of periodization to manage your training much more effectively. You basically need to know what you're doing and when you're doing it. Do you have a heavy day or do you have a volume day? Are you currently working with a high bar or a low bar? Are you potentially working on any issues you're running into? What specific accessories do you have? The list can go on and on. Next up is learning an effective bracing position. Effective bracing starts by creating intra-abdominal pressure in every direction of the midsection. A lifting belt can help with this because it physically allows you to push into something as you create that tension in the midsection. Think about this can of Diet Coke. The internal pressure keeps the can solid, but as soon as the pressure is released, all of that tension is gone. You ideally should feel the entire 360-degree angle of your midsection contracting into that lifting belt. And finally is mastering the bottom position or the hold. Now, interestingly, your bottom position will actually change depending on what your goal is, so it's important you know which one is for you and you get it locked down. Now, there are three types I'm going to run through here: the conventional, the powerlifter, and the Olympic weightlifter. Your normal squat is what you're going to see day to day if you go into a gym and you see someone doing the back squat. The goal here is just simply good depth to utilize the quads and maintain an efficient position to maximize the load. The upper body position will be suited to the individual. If your goal is compete in powerlifting, specifically squat, bench and deadlift, you'd ideally want to squat to meet the parallel standard as close as you can. Getting as much depth as possible isn't necessarily required and will essentially hinder your ability to progress in competition. Aim to build up your motor learning by hitting a solid parallel or just below to be safe. If you'd like some transfer from your squatting to Olympic lifting, then this next style of squatting could be for you. Your goal here is as much depth as you can manage while maintaining solid back extension in the bottom position. You'll be looking to maintain as upright a posture as possible to mimic the catch position of the Olympic lifts. Keep the head upright throughout to maintain good positioning from the upper body. We're aiming for a slight bounce out of the bottom position and returning to the top position with as much speed as you can. If you've watched this far, I am massively appreciative. If you can give me any feedback, or if you feel like I've missed anything in this video that you'd like me to cover, please, please, please feel free to leave a comment down below. Give me any feedback that you can. Everything is appreciated, guys. Thank you very much for this, and I will see you in the next one.